Hey everyone, it's Jim. Welcome back to another Raise Game Fully video. Today I'm making another video in my Mystara Revisited series, where I talk about the Dungeons & Dragons game world of Mystara. In particular, I've been talking about a series of products called Gazetteers, which have fleshed out various nations on the game world to explore and adventure in. But before I get into details of today's Gazetteer, I want to take a moment and take a step back and look at all the nations that we've explored so far. Here is a composite map of the nations I've talked about already. We started out in the Grand Duchy of Karamikos, which on this map is on the right coastal area. This is the traditional starting point for campaigns in basic Dungeons & Dragons. From Karamikos we went south to the islands of Minrathod, home of the Sea Elves. We also journeyed west to the lands of the Halflings, the Five Shires. And then we crossed the mountain range to the north and talked about the Republic of Dorokin and the elven nation that's contained within its borders, the Kingdom of Alfheim. Today, we are traveling east, over the mountains, into our subject today, Gazetteer 2, The Emirates of Ylaruam, written by Ken Ralston. At the beginning of my videos, I usually take a couple minutes to talk about the flavor of the setting. It should be obvious from the cover of the product that Ylaruam is a desert setting. And I've always loved desert settings. It's a little bit of a departure from the medieval European setting. They tend to have really cool exotic adventures and challenges to overcome. For fans of history out there, Ylaruam is based upon Saudi Arabia in the 7th century, around the time of the birth of Islam and the life of the Prophet Muhammad. There's a great drawing inside the product that I really feel captures the essence of day-to-day life in the Emirates. The interior art was done by Doug Chaffee, perhaps, if I mispronounced your name. Doug, if you're watching, I apologize. But here's a drawing here that really encapsulates life in Ylaruam. We see people gathered in a building or perhaps a tent. They're discussing travel as evidenced by the maps. It could be a military expedition or it could be a merchant expedition. They're having coffee. And this is just a perfect snapshot of what the Emirates are to the world of Mystara. So the cover of the product is here. The artwork, of course, is done by Clyde Caldwell. Inside the cover of the product are some maps. This one here is kind of a shot of the Emirates as a whole. You can see it's a desert basin. It's sunken in from the surrounding land. There's mountains to the north, mountains to the south, and mountains to the west. There's an ocean to the east. To the south of Ylaruam is the nation of Thyatis. It's a nation I haven't talked about yet. To the north of the Emirates are a group of kingdoms referred to as the Northern Reaches, which I haven't talked about yet. And it also borders the dwarven kingdom of Rockholm. Inside the cover of the product are some drawings here. These are some drawings from some of the famous buildings in the capital of Ylaruam. At the bottom is the palace of the Caliph, or the Sultan. He's the emperor of all of the Emirates. The top of the panel is the Dream of a Desert Garden University, which was built by the prophet who has restructured society in the Emirates, Al-Khalim. I'll talk about him at length. And the other two panels inside the cover deal with a subject I'm going to discuss later, so I won't show you those right away. The product did contain a large fold-out paper map that had several maps on it. The first map, or the largest map on the paper fold-out, is a map of the Emirates itself. I'm going to cut to full screen here. You can see that most of the Emirates are covered in sand. It's a desert, obviously. There are some well-traveled trade routes. On the map they're drawn as roads. They aren't really roads, they're more of just caravan routes. And there are several cities across the nation. There are 6 Emirates in Ylaruam. They are designated by the thin red lines on the map. The Emirates are all run from cities, if you will, built around water holes. You can see the green areas on the map where cities and towns have sprung up. Ylaruam is in the center, the red city there. There are some areas to the north and south that are in the foothills of the mountains that aren't desert proper. They're more badlands or broken hills. To the west, you'll also notice some different topography there. There's some scrubland, some grasslands, with several villages that lead up to the Dwarven Gate. And I'll talk about those a little bit later. Also in the large fold-out map are some smaller maps. Here is a map of the city of Ylaruam itself, and this is in the same style of maps I've discussed earlier. Different colors indicate different neighborhoods based on wealth or status. This is a map of the village of Kirkuk, which will figure into the gazetteer later on. I'll be discussing Kirkuk in length. There's the name got cut off. This is a map of the city of Suraman Ra, which is located on the northern coast of Ylaruam. And there was a map of the city of Tamaranikas, which is located on the southern coast of Ylaruam. Okay, let's dive into the product itself. This booklet was one booklet with two parts. There was a Dungeon Master's part and a player's guide inside of it. So I will start with the player's guide. And like other gazetteers in the series, the player's guide starts with what everyone knows about the Emirates, with tavern rumors or local legends that kind of describe the people, the places, what the culture is like, how to get rich and famous. And I do want to read a couple of excerpts from very, very different accounts of the nation. The first one here on the slide, it talks about tavern rumors, and there's an entry here about what the people of Ylaruam are like. And it reads, "The people of Ylaruam hate outsiders. None of them speak any civilized tongues, and if they do, they pretend they don't. They're hot-tempered and always fighting among themselves. They dress funny, all wrapped up in these long robes and headdresses, which they wear even in the hot sun. They live in the desert in tents, though some live in crude brick houses in the cities. They all ride camels and horses, and great horses they are, mind you, and they're pretty sharp traders. They aren't very civilized since they live outside all the time, and they haven't got any princes, lords, nobles like we have, just tribal chiefs." Even without knowing much about the culture or knowing much about Dungeons & Dragons, you can probably get the sense that that's a pretty skewed account of what the people are like. It's pretty biased. There's a similar inquiry made of a veteran adventurer, someone who's actually been to the nation, and this is what the adventurer has to say about the people of Ylaruam. It's very different. "The people, most are honest and honorable. When they give their word, they mean to keep it. They are extremely religious, always praying and quoting Al-Kalim, their hero and prophet. Debating fine points of law and ethics is a pleasant pastime for them. They have little trust or respect for unbelievers and foreigners, and from what I've seen of the world, with some justice. As a people, they're most touchy about honor and quick with a sword when you offend it. Most citizens are armed and quite with weapons, and they're happy to use them. The soldiery is first-rate, they are disciplined, well-trained, and fiercely loyal." So just in that account, you can see that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Emirates, the people that live there, and their attitudes. Someone who's been there, or someone who has taken the time to travel amongst the Yllari, would know a lot more about them, their laws, their customs, their religious practices, than an outsider who's never been there. So I thought that was a really, really neat way to introduce people to the product from a player's point of view. There's a nice section here on creating characters from Ylaruam, or Yllari characters. And it's the same character creation process that's used in basic Dungeons & Dragons. There are some cool ways to give your character that Yllari flavor. There's a name chart here. If you want to come up with something that sounds more Yllari, these are Middle Eastern names such as Mustafa, Rahman, Ravi, Muhammad, Mizra, Khalid. It's also got a tribal chart. You can tell what tribe you're from. It talks about towns and villages. It's very important to Ylaruam people to say where you come from, who your parents are, what they do for work. It also has a way to give your character a distinct feature, such as a tan or a hooked nose or bucked teeth. It also talks about nicknames. Many Ylaruam characters have nicknames, and it offers some here, such as the Black Hand, the Poet, the Half-Heart, the Tale-Teller, the Winter Rat, things like that that give you more of a Ylaruam flavor to your character. There's a section in the player's guide that talks about other rules, other procedural things, such as horse riding. Horses are very, very important to the Ylaruam. They're excellent horse breeders and trainers, so it's a matter of pride to Ylaruam about how well you can handle your horse. There's some extra modifiers here for riding checks. But the page that I put up here is a very interesting addition to the rules that deals with storytelling. In Ylaruam, storytelling isn't just a pastime, it's an art form. And to tell a good story can really influence trade or social or political encounters. And there's a great chart here where you can devise your storytelling rating. It's a combination of your intelligence, your wisdom, your charisma, and your character level. You add those up, you get your storytelling rating. And then there's certain modifiers on this chart here. They're probably pretty small to see, but there's modifiers, and you would roll percentile dice when you tell your story, add it to your storytelling rating, and you would get a reaction from your crowd. And if you're able to look at the results on the audience response part of the chart, you can see that telling a good story can give you immense reputation among the Ylaruam people. It will give you a bonus to your reaction checks. Tales will spread about how you're an amazing storyteller. People will react favorably to you. They might give you gifts. They might give you discounts on wares or on an inn. Conversely, if you tell a bad story, bad things can happen. They can run you out of town. You can have an experience point penalty awarded to you. So storytelling is something that's very serious in the Ylaruam culture. And I thought that was a great addition to the game. In addition to just having some downtime in between adventures, you could gather in a tent or in a tavern and you can compete in this storytelling that can very, very tangibly affect your course of your adventure. There's a section in the player's guide that talks about dervishes or desert druids. This is a really cool character class that's based on a couple of different things. Most simply put, dervishes are monks. If you're familiar with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you probably have an idea of what monks are like. They're meditative, they don't really use weapons, they focus on unarmed combat and inner peace and strength. So they took, the author took the idea of monks from D&D, Advanced D&D, and mixed it with the basic D&D concept of druid. Of course, a druid is a priest of the earth, someone who is in tune with nature, who's in tune with the earth and has earth-based magic. And it wouldn't necessarily come to mind to have a druid type of a priest in a desert setting, but by mixing the concept of a priest of the earth with this monkish character, they've created the character called dervishes, which is really, really cool. Dervishes are well respected in Ylaruam culture, much in the way that clerics are respected in other nations. There is a page that talks about courtesy tips for foreigners. Since there haven't been too many outsiders who have journeyed into the desert, there are a lot of misconceptions, as I pointed out, about what life is like there. And this page just gives a couple of tips as far as salutations. For example, there's greetings and responses in the center of the page. Somebody, for example, would come up to you and would say, "Peace be upon you." Your response, your appropriate response would be an "upon you peace." There are other things such as, if somebody were to ask, "How are you?" you would respond, "Well, praise be to the immortal ones." So there's lots of social customs and greetings that are practiced in Ylaruam. They are religious in nature. Much of Ylaruam culture has to do with the immortals and their prophet hero Al-Khalim, which I'll get into shortly. There's also a section here that talks about staging the Name. The Name is the holy book of the Ylaruam people, and it's more of an anecdotal collection of wisdom and tales to give the Ylaruam people a sense of morality. It's a way of pointing out that the immortals wish this to be so, the wise men have decided this is so, and these are things that have been practiced over the centuries, in particular by Al-Khalim and his companion Farid. There's no actual text of the Name, but it's neat to throw little snippets into your adventures to simulate the wisdom that these people hold so dear. And here are a couple of quotes I just want to share with you that can be thrown into your campaign to give it that Ylaruam feel. We must be the candles that burn so others might have light. If friendship is a diamond, then troubles are a diamond mine. There is no power but in the immortals. Al-Khalim has said the stranger must be succored in times of need. There's just these little pearls of wisdom that people of Ylaruam love to quote and throw out, especially when it suits their purposes. And the last page of the player's guide is a glossary. This was a really nice touch because there are several things in the Gazetteer that are related to Islamic culture or Arabian culture. Summarizes all that for you. Okay, this is the Dungeon Master's book. There's a quick little introduction here. There's a drawing on the front. It's very Lawrence of Arabia. I love that. The first part of the Dungeon Master's book goes into the history of Ylaruam. And one of the things I love about Ylaruam is it's a relatively new nation. It was only founded as a nation about 170 years ago, and it has undergone this religious revolution. In years past, there were lots of colonial overlords that came to Ylaruam. The Phaeacian Empire was one. Before that, it was the Alphatian Empire, which I haven't really talked about too much. But the Ylaruam people were scattered, tribal peoples living in the desert, and they were constantly being subjugated by these imperial overlords. And it was only with the birth of Al-Khalim, who established unity in the Emirates. He was able to take the wisdom of the immortals, compose it in a form in the Nama that was there for all to see and appreciate. And with this unity, with this purpose, the Ylaruam people were able to drive out the foreigners. They were able to drive out the colonial overlords and establish a nation among themselves. And as I mentioned, this only happened 170 years ago. Al-Khalim died about 100 years ago, and his heirs have been running the country as sultans. The Emirates are unified more in thought than in practice. The religious teachings of Al-Khalim unify the people, and they are all true believers. They've all adopted his teachings wholeheartedly, and that is the unifying power. The political power, although there is a sultan, although there is this figurehead that rules the empire, the true power lies in the Emirates, each individual kingdom itself. The next section of the Gazetteer talks about the land and ecology. There's a lot of detail here that talks about the geology, the topography, the plants and the animals. If you think back to the map that I had on the screen, it's not just all desert. There's hills, there's oases, there's broken land, there's some scrubland. The nation of Ylaruam isn't the same from place to place. Most of it is deep desert, but there are lots of areas that are not. And this section here talks about those areas, the climate, how arid it is, weather effects. There's a large section on the peoples of the Emirates themselves. And they're not just of one ethnic background. The peoples of Ylaruam are primarily Alasians, or Alasians, I'm not really sure how you say that word. These are the desert people that dwell in the majority of the country. But there are lots of people of other heritage in Ylaruam as well. There's a group of people that are called Makistani. If you look on this page here, it talks about the Makistani. They live in the western grasslands near the border of the Dwarvish Kingdom. They are descended from people from on the other side of the Dwarven Kingdom, from a land called Athengar. I haven't talked about Athengar in my video series yet. There's a group of people who dwell in the northern part of Ylaruam called Nithians. The Nithians are kind of a savage people. They worship dark powers. They're evil and mysterious. Al-Khalim actually went so far as to call them a cursed race and forbade his followers from dealing with them, which of course leads to great adventurers up in the foothills with these fire-worshipping, demon-worshipping servants of evil who are looking to resurrect fallen empires or gods. There are some Thracians, primarily on the southern coast. There are a couple of Alphatian descents, peoples of Alphatian descents on the northern coast, but they are in the vast minority. There's a large section here on economics. With the creation of the nation of Ylaruam, there's a lot of interest in trade, and they are actively encouraging merchant caravans to trade with them and to journey from Ylaruam to other nations. The trade routes are big business, and the Ylaruam chiefs know this. So the section here breaks down the commodities that the various Emirates import and export. I won't go into all the details. There's a large section here on society. And this deals primarily with Al-Khalim, the eternal truth that he discovered and brought to the people. The life of Al-Khalim, how he lived his life, is considered exemplary and is considered something that the average Ylaruam citizen would want to emulate. So details of his life have become legendary. I won't go into all the details here, but it involves compiling truths about life and the universe that were given to him by the immortals. Now, as I mentioned, Al-Khalim passed away about 100 years ago, and there has been some disagreement over who should succeed him. There are currently two factions of nobles that are always trying to put their candidate on the throne to become the next sultan. And it's kind of funny that the product talks about the conflict within these parts of the nobility, but it doesn't actually tell you who the sultan is. I did find in a separate product on Mystara that they do mention who the current sultan of Ylaruam is. It's a man in his 40s by the name of Muhammad al-Khalim, a direct descendant. But there is a section here that talks about other factions who claim to have a right to govern. And this kind of falls along lines of people who want to open up Ylaruam to the outside world and interact and trade more, with and contrast that with a group of followers who are more xenophobic. They just don't want to deal with the outside world. They feel like they are non-believers. They should be conquered or shown the truth. So there's a big division within the society and in the nobility over which direction the Emirates should go in. The society section also talks about the way of Al-Khalim, how Al-Khalim's teachings and his life can affect the average person. It talks about the way of the followers, and this is by and large the populace of the nation. You just follow the practices of Al-Khalim, follow the wisdom that he outlined, and try to be a good person. there is a way of the warrior. Warriors are very important to the Ylaruam people. They are revered as a different caste of people, and the bureaucracy of Ylaruam is such that the military orders are broken down into very, very distinct organizations based on weapons. So for example, here in the military orders you find the Order of the Pike, the Order of the Arrow, the Order of the Spell, the Order of the Mace, and the Order of the Lance. And depending on which type of combat you want to learn, what type of fighter you want to become, you would become part of one of these orders, and these orders help to teach combat techniques to its followers to just become better warriors in general, but also to help protect and defend the nation of Ylaruam itself. There's also the way of the scholar, and this is more of a religious pursuit. It's not exactly a magical pursuit. This is more of a priest thing, clerical things. They would pursue the immortals and understand what the immortals are trying to teach us, instead of more of a military type of cleric. The Ylaruam don't really have a military role for their clerics. They're basically more wise men. But of course, this is D&D, so if you want to have your character be a fighting type cleric, by all means, you join one of these military orders, and you could use both the military teachings and the scholarly teachings to create your character. There is a section here that talks about special spells that are available to clerics who worship the immortals through the teachings of Al-Kalim. And I just want to talk about a couple of them. They're really, really cool. One is called Poetic Inspiration, which is basically a variation of the Bless spell, but it's neat in that you have to recite a poem in order to invoke it. There's a spell called Truth Telling, which forces the recipient of the spell to speak the truth. There's a spell called Detect Water, which obviously is important in the desert. And there's a cool spell called Know Destiny, which is similar to a Commune or Contact Higher Outer Plane spell. But the interesting part about these spells is if you choose to use them, if you choose to be a Ylaruam cleric and you have access to these spells, you sacrifice other spells to gain them. For example, the Detect Water spell is available to you, but you are not able to use Resist Cold. The Poetic Inspiration spell does not have a replacement, it's just a new spell. The Know Destiny spell replaces a Growth of Animal. So you would have access to these spells that give you more of a Ylaruam flavor, but at the same time you wouldn't have spell that a traditional basic D&D cleric would have access to. There's a section here on social structure and social status. Status is a big thing in Ylaruam. There aren't freemen and slaves and nobles like in other nations we've talked about, but there are statuses based on what your family does and what rank they might have. A worker is below a merchant in terms of social status, and that would have an effect on role-playing. If you were to role-play a dinner, for example, or a business meeting, it's assumed that characters of a higher status would have a better seat, or they would be served food first. And this would lead itself to all kinds of great role-playing scenarios, whether somebody's insulted or somebody wasn't seated at the right place. And it's a individual, it's more of a Ylaruam flavor that you can add to your adventure, or even time between adventures, which just give it a different flavor. There is a large section on government and politics. As I mentioned, there's a large bureaucracy in place to govern the Emirates, and this is, as far as nobles go, you've got your Sultan who's in charge of the nation, and beneath the Sultan there are the Emirs who run the Emirates themselves. Within each Emirate there are lesser noble rulers, such as a beg or an atabeg, and these are analogous to a count or a duke in more Western societies. There are, below these nobles, there are chiefs, or also cadis, and the chiefs are kind of in charge of individual towns or individual settlements. So you can see there's a very structured political system in Ylaruam to ensure that concerns and desires and laws get moved from smaller areas down to larger areas, and everybody is kind of on the same page. There is a chart here that explains the titles I just mentioned, which gives them more of an Arabian flavor. It talks about the bureaucracy. Everything in the Emirates is structured or broken down into voucheries, and this kind of reminds me of in American politics, the cabinet and all the departments. You've got the Department of the Treasury and Defense and things like that. So there's voucheries in Ylaruam for these things. There's a vouchery of the state, of water resources, agriculture, merchant affairs, the provinces, sorcery, and each of these voucheries is run by a vizier. Viziers are very, very powerful people, and they're not afraid to get their hands dirty. It's often said that when you deal with rulers, nice thing happens. When you deal with viziers, not so nice things happen. And their job is to get things done. So the viziers and the assistants they have under them that rule these various voucheries are really concerned with making sure that the rules are followed. They're making sure that things are done correctly and according to the wishes of the Sultan. So there's this pyramid structure of officials that oversee lots of things, and this can lead to some great interaction, some great role play. You might run afoul of an official from the tax department. You might offend somebody who's related to the chief, but you're on a mission from the vouchery of water, so there could be some you could be at odds with a local chieftain if you were hired by someone who's a vizier or in the water vouchery, and there's just really great adventure hooks waiting to be had with these interactions between different levels of the government. There is a nice section here on relations with other nations. Because Ylaruam is a new nation and because it's just starting to explore the outside world, they don't necessarily embrace other peoples or other cultures. And just to talk about the nations that I've already talked about in this video series and their relations with Ylaruam. So for example, the official government relations with Karamikos are distant but cordial. They look at Karamikos as an important market for their wares. Alfheim relations are reserved and xenophobic. The people of Ylaruam don't really understand elves. They really don't understand forests. And it seems to be a very, very strange way of life for the Ylarii, so they're not terribly comfortable dealing with elves. Dorokan, they have natural interests with the Emirates in terms of security along the trade routes and trading their goods, so relations are pretty good as long as the trade routes are open and there aren't any problems with trade tariffs or things like that. As far as the Five Shires go, it's such a distant land, and not many halflings make it to Ylaruam, so relations are pretty distant. And as far as Minrathad goes, Minrathad, of course, bases its economy on sea trade, and there's only a couple of ports in Ylaruam, so there's little or no contact on diplomatic level between the Ylarii and the Minrathad government, but you would certainly see Minrathad agents in the ports. Of course, the nations that border Ylaruam are more pressing to the Ylarii people. Thyatys to the south, of course, used to be a colonial power, and they don't really get along too well with the Ylarii. The dwarves to the north are kind of good friends to the Ylarii who live in the western part of the nation. The dwarves tend to keep to themselves, and the Ylarii are fine with that. And as far as the people of the northern reaches, there's only one real trade route from Ylaruam up into the north, and the cultures are so vastly different that relations are very reserved, and I won't get into that too much. There's a large section in the book on law. Laws aren't really written down in Ylaruam. They're more moral laws that have been outlined in the Name, or have been outlined by the eternal truth of Al-Kalim. So individual laws haven't been written down. It talks a lot about enforcement of those laws, and just to sum it up, there's a lot of traveling holy men, paladin type characters who travel the world, who travel the nation, and act as judges in local disputes, or very often disputes are brought before a local chief or even emir to decide. There are different sets of laws for foreigners or unbelievers, and the Ylarii are generally not tolerant of unbelievers who commit crimes in their lands, and they are usually dealt with harshly. Some things that are against the law in Ylaruam are things like water theft, well poisoning, practicing evil or black magic, concealed sorceress ability. In Ylaruam, it is a rule or a law that if you are a wizard, you need to be dressed as such. You need to have a robe, or you need to have something very, very obvious about you, telling everybody else that you are a wizard. So concealing sorceress ability is a crime in the Emirates, as is theft, assault, murder, destruction of property, treason, things along those lines. Okay, this next section is probably the most important or most usable section in the Gazetteer. So this section presents the village of Kirkuk, and Kirkuk it's so many things. It's a staging point for other adventures, it's a home base, it's kind of a mini campaign setting in and of itself. It's not detailed anywhere on the maps of Ylaruam. The DM is encouraged to put Kirkuk wherever they want to place it. Depending on where your characters will be traveling to or from, you can place the village just about anywhere. But it was a really, really great setting, mini-setting, town, village, that has just about everything you would want as a dungeon master. It has inns, and it has, places to eat. It has officials from the government to interact with and accept jobs from. The government, not only the central government, but even local governments across Ylaruam are more than willing to hire out foreigners for various jobs, whether it's to recover things or investigate rumors of black magic or try to locate lost artifacts. There are lots of things to do in and around Kirkuk. And I think that's what makes it so cool to me, is it's so adaptable. You can place it in the deep desert. You can place it in the northern Badlands if you want to have more interactions with the Nithians and the fire worshippers. You can place it more in the western part of the nation if you want to have interactions with more foreigners. But there's so much about Kirkuk here. There is a map key which corresponds to the map I showed you earlier. There was a map of Kirkuk on the large fold-out map, and it just talks about a couple of the locations. There's a mason, there's a horse merchant, a caravansary. There is a section here inside Kirkuk that talks about Beit Saddam. This is the house of the chief of the village, whose name is Rahman al-Saddam, and he's the local ruler. He's somebody that can offer hospitality, he can hire out adventurers, and there's people going in and out of his house, which is called Beit Saddam. So people are leaving the Beit, coming into the Beit all the time, and you can interact with many, many people. One great traditional way of getting involved here is to just be an eccentric foreigner who catches his notice, and the chief invites you to a dinner or invites you over for coffee, and you could impress him with a song, or you can impress him with a story or a legend from the land that you're from, and then he can take you into his confidence, perhaps, tell you about things that are going on in the town. He could introduce you to other people who might need some help. There are lots and lots of things to do in Kirkuk. There are lots of adventure hooks, and there are the adventures that the book talks about in Kirkuk run the gamut from low-level, basic-level adventurers to something more for companion-level adventurers, characters who are, 13th, 14th, 15th level. There is a holy site in Kirkuk that Al-Kalim visited, called the Well of the Faithful Prophet. So it's a pilgrimage site for many, many peoples, and there's actually a spin-off adventure where the well gets poisoned. And the section goes on to talk about not just adventure hooks, but staging common events. So it talks about when you first enter the village for the first time, and how the party is swarmed by people convincing them to buy their wares or stay at their inn. People will bargain and shout and get in their face. There's a way of handling beggar encounters. When foreigners come to town, the beggars of the town all get up and run and beg for our handouts. There are other common situations the book talks about are eating out. There are inns and there are taverns in Kirkuk, and just like any other D&D setting, things can happen in taverns. It gives a couple of suggestions of things, of encounters, of ways to start encounters. I'll only read you one here. I thought was kind of cool. It says that NPCs may take the initiative when they see foreigners, and they may approach the characters with something like this. Pardon, but I can't help but notice you gentlemen are from, let me guess, Karamikos, I'll warrant. Am I right? Excuse my effrontery, but would you be so kind as to join me for a cup of tea and tell me of that land? I take every opportunity to learn about the lives of folk from foreign lands. So just something simple like that NPC encounter can lead to contacts, or it can lead to an adventure you have planned. D&D has several pre-published adventures that take place in a desert setting. This could be a hook. As simple as a request for tea can be a great hook to draw your characters into an adventure that you've prepared if you're the dungeon master. It also suggests that you could start an encounter in an aggressive manner. Someone insults the characters and picks a fight with them, which is not expressly forbidden. I mean, unless the Ylaruam have some proof that your characters as foreigners are true believers, characters are going to assume that they're unbelievers. And there aren't particularly any laws that state it's illegal to harass unbelievers. So a good old-fashioned bar fight could ensue, and that's certainly a possibility. There is a great section here on important NPCs. It breaks them down into NPCs that are inclined to be friendly towards the party, characters that are generally neutral towards the party, and characters that might be considered villains or opponents of the party. And this is just really, really great, the way that they designed this. There's a secretary of the provinces here named Mustafa. There's a barber who's friends with everybody, and he just is into gossiping. There's tribal leaders come and go from Kirkuk all the time, so you could run into just about anybody, Qadis or other nobles. There are beggars, as I mentioned. There's a prayer leader. In terms of villains, they're kind of nefarious characters that aren't openly hostile, like the tax official. He's always interested in figuring out what you brought into town, where you got it, is it stolen, how much can I charge you for taxes for bringing it into my town. So there's almost like a nuisance monster type of NPC. One really big character that is mentioned in the book is Barrymore. Barrymore is a wonderful character that is probably the last thing I expected when I first read this gazetteer. Barrymore is a very, very powerful Alphatian wizard who came to Ylaruam about 2 centuries ago, and he had a follower of apprentices and alchemists with him. He carved out an underground lair for himself, and he's researching forbidden magics to allow him to transcend his mortal life and become an immortal. Obviously, this is something that's higher end for an adventuring party. You wouldn't necessarily want to get mixed up with Barrymore if you were 4th level. It's something more for 15th or 20th or even higher level characters to deal with. But Barrymore is described here in the book. His bodyguards and his servants and his minions are described. He has a rather extensive network of minions. He's summoned monsters. He's familiar with creating portals to other planes. And he's just this ultimate evil that you can use if you so choose. If your characters are just passing through and they just want to run 1 or 2 adventures, get an idea of what Ylaruam is like, or just taste its flavor, you don't necessarily need to whip out the giant bad guy who lives in the caves beneath the town. But if they're from Ylaruam, or if they're going to be using this as a more permanent base, if they're going to be coming back here periodically, this might be a great idea to throw a really powerful evil character into the campaign, and it's all spelled out here for you. This actually ties back into the inside cover of the product I mentioned at the beginning of the video. 2 of the panels of the inside cover of the product detail Barrymore's underground complex. And he's got a rather extensive subterranean network here. The small map at the top there on the left is kind of like a network of tunnels and where they lead under Ylaruam. He's got tunnels that go from some of the major cities that connect underground. The bottom right, of course, is a picture of what the dwellings underground look like. And then the top right is a drawing of his personal keep. And the majority of the map shows the tunnels around his keep. Barrymore is nothing to be trifled with. He is a 36th level magic user, and of course in basic Dungeons & Dragons, 36th level is the highest level you can be. So a 36th level magic user living under an unsuspecting town with his whole retinue of summoned monsters and fanatical cultists it's just stuff of what this game is all about. This is kind of what D&D is, right? You go underground and you find minions and mini bosses and bosses, and they're all working for this complete psychopath. So Barrymore is a great addition to the campaign, and you can do it in stages with Kirkuk. There are caves nearby. A cave might lead down into his complex, or you might find some of his followers committing crimes in the night. But if you're looking to introduce an ultimate evil to your campaign, Barrymore is prepped and ready to go. The last section on Kirkuk talks about adventure hooks. Nothing too involved. It talks about defeating raiders, or someone's son has gone missing, the poisoned well, which I mentioned earlier. It also talks about pilgrims who come here to relive part of Al-Kalim's life. He came here, obviously, so you'll always have pilgrims to interact with, and either exploring a holy site or uncovering a holy relic is a distinct possibility in Kirkuk. This leads nicely into the next section, which talks about campaigning in Ylaruam, and continuing the campaign beyond an adventure or two, kind of like I discussed. There were ancient civilizations here before the rise of Al-Kalim. So in the lesser traveled places, in the caves, in the Badlands, it's very possible to discover a ruined palace, a ruined temple, a sacrificial altar. There's so many great places to hide ruins or evidence of lost civilizations and cultures in Ylaruam. I feel that it's useful just about anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Kirkuk. You don't have to place everything you've designed underneath this one tiny village. But as the drawing here shows, it's very possible that a crack in the earth leads to a staircase, that leads to a flooded temple, that leads to evidence of the Nithians or their descendants, the Magian fire worshippers. Maybe there's an old military base that the Thaitian Empire created and abandoned, and maybe now it's haunted. There's so much to do in Ylaruam. There's so much that's buried under the sands or in the caves, in the foothills. It's pretty much a blank slate, despite the fact that there's immense material contained in this book, 65 pages or so. There's so much room for more to be created. And it does list a couple of suggestions if you're going to be campaigning in Ylaruam long term. You can either do it before Al-Khalim's birth, contemporary with his life, or after his birth, after his death rather. But there are so many cool things to do in an Ylaruam campaign. This page here talks about the ultimate evil that I mentioned. You're certainly welcome to have one or not have one. If you do want to have one, it talks about the fire worshippers, it talks about Barrymore, it talks about some other things I didn't get into. Maybe there are other Alphatians looking to destabilize the government. Maybe there are Phaeacians looking to destabilize the government. And then there's a list here of monsters to be found in Ylaruam and references to the rule books, or if you're using the rule cyclopedia, there are some references here to monsters that are commonly found in the Emirates. There is a great section on fabled treasures. Throughout Al-Khalim's life and his adventures, he talked about interacting with the immortals and some of the magic items that they bequeathed upon humans, or things that he stumbled across in ruins or lost temples. They're really, really cool. One is called the Carnelian Idol, which is just a statue of a griffin, and it's basically possessed. It has some type of personality of a evil wizard or something in it, and it like whispers thoughts to you to tempt you to go and do things that you shouldn't be doing. I think that's a great idea for a campaign. There's a magic item here called the Sparkling Spear, which is a weapon that was once wielded by Al-Khalim's companion Farid. This is a wonderful weapon. It's a spear, +4, +6 against fire creatures. There's something called Dendane Oil, which was harvested from the sea. That essentially is a potion of water breathing. And it talks about all kinds of great treasures to be found in Ylaruam. And there are more developed hooks here as well, and it breaks it down by experience level. So for basic level adventures, it talks about Aladdin's Cave, which is a tale known to most of us about how a vast treasure cave is found. Perhaps there's a genie lamp or an Ifrit lamp or a ring of wishes buried in the cave. There's an adventure called the Valley of Diamonds, which is a deep pit that doesn't really contain diamonds, it just contains glass, but maybe it leads to a hidden tunnel of some type. There's a short hook about a quick magical thunderstorm that appears in the desert, and after the thunderstorm passes, there's a lake of multicolored fish that appears out of nowhere. It talks about recreating parts of Al-Khalim's pilgrimage, as many true believers are wont to do. It talks about something called the Dead Place, perhaps a famous battle site, or a graveyard where undead things wander. There's just so much to do. There's so many possibilities in Ylaruam. Yes, it has that desert setting, so you won't be trudging through the snow looking for frost giants, but within the confines of the desert, there's so much to do. There's so much that's been printed in this book that was really, really well done. There's so much left to the Dungeon Master to design adventures that they want to do themselves. And it's a great addition to Mystara. I feel like so often players and Dungeon Masters get hung up on other nations that figure more prominently in Mystara's history. I'll probably get to that in a future video. But Ylaruam is kind of out of the way place that seems to be one thing, but in reality it can be anything else. There's lots of potential here for adventure, or for finding lost magic, or just about anything else that you want to make of it. And it is truly one of my favorite settings. Alright, well that is it. That was my take on the Emirates of Ylaruam. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to make another video soon, but that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please be kind to your fellow players.